Now with that, I think we're going to open it up to kind of a Q&A, and I'll hand the mic over to Brian, and if I could get Cole and Rich up here. Sorry, I caught Cole with a mouthful of salad.
So when you state your question, just make sure that you make it pretty audible so everyone can hear it. And then if you want to direct it at one of the speakers in particular, just say which one. If not, then we can just let you guys handle it, whichever one sounds the best to you. So with that, questions for our three terrific speakers. Come on. Okay, Brad.
So being in the bigger club of the losers of capitalism, which I know several of us have been through that, I appreciate and really respect all the three of you because I know what it took to get through that. The question I have for you is this. If you have a short period of time, we're in an iPod, iPhone, iPad world, how do you make the moral case quickly and a way to connect people from the heart rather than the mind? Because we always go to the mind, and you all had great stories, but how would you do it more quickly so the average person could engage somebody?
I'd love to start with that because it hits Cole. Cole, I thought these guys hit on it as well. To me, I mean, I go back again and again to say, look, if I got up and walked across the room and stuck my gun in your ear, and most people who know me know that, I have drawstrings on my PJs, all right? I carry 24/7, all right? So if I go up and stick a gun in your ear and say, hey, give me $40 because there's this homeless guy in my corner and I got to give him something, would that be moral? And everybody says, no, of course not, right? And then so I go to so I'm basically going Bastiat on them. I'm saying, then what makes it moral for government to do that? And then I just let that seed grow, and I just kind of, that's a quick.
It's a great question. It's kind of the critical question, right? And sometimes I get freaked out just because it's the question is, does America even care, really, at the end of the day? I mean, Snooki is entertaining, and, so it's like, well, I don't know if they want to know about it. But I think for me, it's back to what I said. It's first and foremost that you have the right to choose this, don't you? Do you want to choose it, or do you want somebody else to choose it for you? In combination with, are you 100% confident the person choosing it for you is doing it for your benefit and not their benefit? Those are two things. Do you care more about yourself than he does? And do you have a right to choose it, or would you prefer him to do it? That's really what it gets back to. And the last thing I'd say is, in there somewhere is the empowerment of somebody. And I think that they tear people down pretty good. You can't do this. You're not going to be able to. You can't create it. They're out to get you. You got to trust us. It's hard, but I think that if we started to inspire people about what they could do and what they could create and what they could achieve, all of a sudden that dynamic changes pretty dramatically. So it's tough to do it in 30 seconds, but I think it's possible.
I'm going to disagree. I love what you're trying to accomplish, but I don't think that in 30 seconds, if you're talking to somebody who's never really given this some thought, that you're going to change their mind in 30 seconds. The best you can hope for is to get them down to an essential point that's going to make them think when they go away. And I think these two have hit on perfectly what to say, which is, what is the essence of government? The government is force. The government is the entity that we give the right to force us to do things. Now, they force us to not kill each other, and if we do, they imprison us. But they also force us to do a bunch of stuff they have no business forcing us to do. And so if you can get the point of force across to somebody, you're going to at least make them think.
Another example would be an education. As an example, if the person has kids, right? So, like, who knows your kid better than you? Well, no one does, of course, right? When you go to parent-teacher conferences, what are you doing? Well, I'm finding out what my kid's doing, but I'm telling my teacher, I'm explaining my kid to my teacher so that they can do a better job, right? So, who knows your kids better than you? Well, I do. Well, you can. I've homeschooled, all right? I've sent my kids to private school. I've sent my kids to public school. I've homeschooled. I've done it all. And it's our choice. And so, if you are acting in your self-interest or your kid's self-interest, isn't that the right thing to do? Well, yeah. So now, again, and I just kind of try to let those things seep. And I'm more of a teller, and I'm not really a heart person for those of you who've been for LPR, but I'm trying to get better at that heart thing because it's like, okay, who cares more about your kids than you? Well, nobody does. Well, then connect on that level and then say, this is what the state wants to do. What do you want to do for your kids? Right? Other questions? Come on, give me a tough one.
Love politics. Come
Dude,
on.
go.
Last question.
Go.
What about somebody was asking about who the villain was, and I always think of Disney because the Disney movies, you guys, you're Ayn Rand people, you say it is moral to be self-interested, and that's just absolute fact to you, and none of the other Ayn Rand people are going to question it. But everybody who's ever seen a Disney movie will question it, because in the Disney movie, the guy who's nice, the guy who goes out of the way, and you talk about the absolute moral right that you read in Ayn Rand, and that's great, and I appreciate it, but I think that's a place where you can really fail to connect with people, where I've never been able to connect with people. And how do you get over that? Oh, we're just, haven't you seen a Disney movie? We're supposed to be nice.
That's a great question. That's the critical question. I'm glad you asked it. I'm going to plagiarize a little bit. I saw something that gets to that point, and I think it does better than I ever would do. The question is not whether or not you believing taking care of other people is moral or not. The question gets back to what's the best and most moral means to do it. And an example, and this is where I'm plagiarizing, I don't know if anybody's seen this, but it's been going around the internet. Let's assume Jason has a sandwich. I'm really hungry, right? And I can't eat. And so I asked Jason, hey, can I have a sandwich? And so he says, yeah, sure. He gives it to me because he believes it's a moral authority. He's got multiple of them. All of a sudden, there's some morality in that transaction, if you believe that, right? He feels good about giving the sandwich. I get to eat it. I feel like I kind of owe something to him. Let me walk you through the alternative scenario. The alternative scenario is Jason's got a sandwich, I'm hungry, and Barack Obama rides up on a horse with a gun. And he points it at Jason and tells me that I get his sandwich and gives it to me, and then he rides off. Well, in that case, Jason's not very pumped up. He certainly doesn't feel like he get the choice or the moral authority to do anything Disney told him to do. And I've got all of a sudden a sense of entitlement. Wish I'd gotten 7 goddamn sandwiches, you know what I mean, with this one sandwich. Right? And so that's really what gets to the critical point of the question. And Mike and I have actually argued about this because Ayn Rand also talks a lot about you can make the same case on Christianity, right? Not to take the rabbit hole too deep, but Ayn Rand talks a lot about kind of the falsity of a God or Christianity, and some of us are very Christian people, and you start to read the Bible and you see some of those altruistic principles come in and they come in conflict with one another. But the idea of sacrificing some of what I have to take care of another human being is a free choice I made to be moral. Barack Obama on a horse with a gun does not all of a sudden make me moral, right? That just all of a sudden totally dramatically changes that transaction 100%. So the idea that somehow you can force me into any sort of morality just doesn't logically work. And that's what we got to try to get through.
Thank you, Cole. You gave me a few extra minutes to think about it. This is really a tricky thing because when you start arguing about morality, people get upset, and it's hard to. I mean, you're poking a finger in somebody's eye and expecting them not to get upset. And so, depending on who the person is, you're going to take a slightly different approach. I mean, some people are lost causes. I hesitate to say this because I have friends of my family in here, but my brother, I think, is a lost cause. And so I literally will not talk politics with him at all. I mean, there is absolutely no point. But there's been a number of people who I've talked to about this. They're like, this is a totally different way of thinking about it. And that's when I start handing them something to read. Because that means that they're active-minded and they're willing to start questioning what it was that they believed, and reconsidering it. And I think that's really the people that we have to engage with. The people who are willing to question, the people who are willing to think about it, and to not just say, oh, I don't believe that, and, shut down. I don't know if that answered your question or if I just tap danced.
Two things. One, I've started going back and trying to be more connecting and telling the story of myself. Now, most of my childhood is repressed, all right, because it wasn't good. I mean, people think, oh, you successful people, you've always been rich and successful and blah, blah, blah. No. I moved around when I was a kid from a broken home, and I lived in more than one house per year. I thought it was because my mom liked to change the scenery. I realized later that it was because she was staying one month ahead of the rent collector. All right? So I grew up poor. I went to college because I had Social Security benefits, right, from the deceased alcoholic father who had died, when I was young. A funny thing happened when I went to college. It was 1981. This guy named Reagan got elected. I'd never heard of him. And those checks, they stopped coming. That sucked. I couldn't go to college anymore. So now I had to come home. I actually had to get a job. I actually had to work my way through college. And you know what? It's the best thing that ever happened to me. I had no idea where that money was coming from. I didn't care. I didn't owe anybody any gratitude. It was, hey, this is how things work. I get to go to college. And I just didn't even know. And had that not happened to me, I have no idea where I'd be now. So personal story, I'm trying to do that. You guys have hit on it exactly. Coercion is not charity. And you're exactly right. If my neighbor, my cul-de-sac, I know every single one of my 22 neighbors. I got 22 neighbors on my cul-de-sac. And if one of them couldn't make their house payments, I guarantee you, we would help him make his house payment. We would, because we know him. Now, what does that do? One, what does it tell that person? It tells that person, you're valuable. We care about you. We're helping you, not because we want to, because you're our neighbor. So it gives him value. All right? What does it do for me? Hey, I like helping my neighbor. I don't want him to be indebted to me. Now, what else does it do for him? It motivates him to get out of that situation because he doesn't want this going on too long. He lives with us. Right? And then what else does it want to do? It makes him want to be able to get in a position where, you know what? Next time one of our neighbors goes down, I'm going to be one of the helpers instead of the helpee. Right? That's what charity is about. That's what helping each other is about. And just like he said, is perfect. The government has stolen compassion from us and put it at the end of a gun. And so now what do we have? We have the neighbor that says, give me my damn money, government. I've been paying my taxes for 4 years. You owe me a benefit, right? So if you can, and as a Christian myself, I believe that the church has played a horrible role in abdicating their role and their responsibility for charity, sloughed it off to the government. And it's not charity when government coerces it.
I just wanted to add one last thing, and that's if you get a chance to talk to Mike Williams about how he engages with people, he is amazing. I sat with him on the corner up in Breckenridge, and there was a guy trying to get us to sign a Kill Big Oil petition. And Mike sat there, we're on vacation, it's like, he sat there for 15 minutes talking to this guy, literally just asking him questions. And by the time he was done, I think the guy felt like putting the petition down and saying, well, I like my shoes, which are made out of petroleum products, and so...
So don't vacation with Mike Williams.
So talk to Mike about how he has the patience to do this.
So
next question?
Dennis here and then Russ.
Well, if this is like the internet where you can comment to 5 comments ago, one of the moral objections to Ayn Rand's philosophies is one of the objections to Ayn Rand's philosophies among my friends is the lack of compassion that seems to be inherent in the philosophy of the Ayn Rand self-interest is good. to comment on a comment, the American society is one of the most generous in the world as far as charitable contributions go. And there's nothing mutually exclusive about self-interest and charity. So it seems to be a straw man or a lame argument that people that have a negative opinion of Ayn Rand and the philosophical structure of self-interest and capitalism is an empty argument, because there's nothing that precludes people being generous and contributing to their fellow man and to neighborhood food banks and whatever they feel like contributing to, because you're a libertarian and you read Ayn Rand's Fountainhead. Yeah, I just made a rambling comment rather than
I was waiting for the question mark at the end there.
No question. It was a comment to a comment.
Well, I think just to tack onto that, in Atlas Shrugged, she goes into a great deal about what is a sacrifice and what is benevolence. And she says giving your neighbor some of your child's food when you have plenty to keep their baby from starving is benevolence. Giving all of your child's food to your neighbor's child and allowing your child to starve is a sacrifice. And she tries to really draw the distinction between benevolence is something that you have for your fellow man when there's not this presupposed obligation, whereas a sacrifice is when you're expected to give until it literally hurts. And so that's what I try to make the distinction when I talk about the difference between being self-interested and benevolent versus being non-charitable.
I think maybe Mike is always kind of wondering, looking at me kind of askew, because I don't have any problem reconciling Christianity and what we're talking about here in terms of liberty or capitalism or free markets or self-interest. I think they're very easy to reconcile. So I'll just kind of leave it at that.
Russ. Earlier you were asked to make the moral case for capitalism in about 30 seconds. Making the moral argument for capitalism on a long enough timeline, does it require an appeal to epistemology and metaphysics?
What? That's awesome. Epistemology and metaphysics. Basically, define it. What he's saying is, and I do have very, very intelligent friends, objectivists, who understand epistemology. Basically, it's what makes you believe what you believe, and how do you define and ascertain truth, and where does it come from? So at a certain level, I have a good friend, and we talk about that a lot, but I'll be honest with you, that's great for him, but it's not real effective with the rest of the folks. And so I'm trying to draw on him, be honest with you, to help me see, like how do we define these words? And what's the epistemology? And I'm like, okay, how can I use what you're telling me and then go package that and communicate it effectively? So I would say, yes, absolutely, those are important things. It's not necessarily something that everybody needs to put their shoulder to. But it is absolutely, because it's a fundamental basis of why you believe what you believe, right? So you have to have a recognition of it. But I think some people are more bent towards that than others, to be honest with you. Not touching that one. Not touching that one. Right in the middle there, okay.
And that's that all three of you have kind of touched on the issue, but it's all tied into the fact that today our human interaction is limited, that we're always on the computer, we're always doing Facebook, and we're not actually interacting face to face. And so we'd like it when our government tells us what we need to do. And it takes that interpersonal relationship away, and that responsibility of being kind to your neighbor and talking to your neighbor and talking to each other.
And that's where we're all responsible for that, right? And that's what I was saying before. Yeah, you're exactly right. And so how many of you live in a cul-de-sac and know every single 20 of your 22 neighbors? I mean, that takes work, man. I mean, but you got to do it. If you can't influence people if you don't know them, right?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. There's no doubt about it. And I might come from a little bit of the younger group that's been through that. And I think it's different. I think the medium is different, but I think the same things exist. And I think that people still love human interaction. They love friends, and maybe it's through different mediums and stuff. But the idea that you can't connect to somebody if you have real truth, I don't buy the argument that it fell away with Facebook. I think it might need to be communicated differently. We might really need to snap people out of it, but I definitely think you can still find somebody and say, hey, I want to talk to you. And I think it's actually given us a better opportunity to do it because they're being interacted so quickly on 30-second sound bites and snips and commercials that people really want to sit down and try to understand these things. We just got to give them a better medium and a better outlet to do it.
Give and not have to worry about the government giving. And that's where your generosity comes in, and not relying on the government to tell you that you need to be generous.
Perfect example of that, actually, of an intersection of these exact things. Facebook. What was the quickest responder to the floods? Facebook. People had set up connections on Facebook, and people got help through Facebook. So it's, what are you saying? It's just a different medium. My wife is I introduced myself to half people around the state as Laurie's husband, all right, because everybody knows Laurie Bratton, all right, on Facebook. If you want to know what's going on in the Capitol, just follow her. But it was the perfect intersection of people helping vis-a-vis Facebook. So I think you're right. I think people can do it. It wasn't government. They beat FEMA like 10 times over.
I think the internet just puts a magnifying glass on human interactions. And so it can make bad situations much worse or good situations much better. And as you were asking the question, I thought that there was a bit of a contradiction because there's a whole bunch of us here meeting face-to-face this evening to talk about politics. And, if all of us would say, why don't we go to a school board meeting? Why don't we go somewhere and engage with somebody? Because we're obviously willing to go out and be face-to-face with other people, we might have more of an impact. But I think the other thing is, if you meet someone online who is open-minded, and I don't mean open-minded as in their minds flapping in the wind and they're open to any idea whatsoever, and today it's the flavor of the month. I mean someone who's willing to really check their premises. Think of it as a magnifying glass, and you have to be more polite online, more patient online to get your point across. And I guess as an example, I have a couple of really great friends that I've never met in person. It's only been an introduction from Facebook. And I don't see eye to eye with them on every issue, but because I am extraordinarily polite, patient, and playful with them, I'm able to get my point across, and we're able to kind of influence each other. So that's, I guess, how I would respond to the
out.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I think that there's a disconnect to actually the human interaction has been challenged by that. A lot of us rely on the media and going on the internet to talk because we don't want to be face-to-face with people, And I think that that's kind of the way our younger generation is coming up, and I think that's why this whole idea of the government saying, hey, we're going to take care of this part for you. You don't have to worry about doing that part. So forth.
All right, so George and then Mike. I do. Okay, so George and then Mike.
You're right.
The difficulty I have sometimes is when I fear that there are kind of conflicting desires. And philosophically, from what I've been hearing and what I've heard in the past on this, taxation would be one of those force items of the government that we would say is not moral. At the same time, if we take the presumption that the Constitution is good and that we accept the premises of the Constitution, one of the roles of government that we would hopefully agree on, the proper roles of government, at least expressed in the Constitution, is to protect the defense of the United States. So if the federal government has that role and needs funding in order to buy guns or to put together a military, and it doesn't have enough money by people's charity, it's then uses its force to tax people to raise that money. So I see a potential conflict there amongst the two. If you accept the Constitution is proper and that is the proper role of government, how would you respond to that, I guess, conflicting two conflicting
That's a great
roles?
You said the military should be funded by charity, did you?
No, I'm just saying that if you didn't tax, you would have. If you didn't tax, you'd have to do it by bake sales or something like that. But
Yeah, so I'm happy to take that one, and I don't know if we've got any anarchist libertarians here, so I might contradict you on anybody in the room that believes in some of that stuff. But defining capitalism can be tough, right? Everybody kind of comes up with their own definition, and the way I like to think about it is just imagine a graph for me here, and on the y-axis you have individual liberty, right? And it goes up. And on the right side, you've got the amount of government, right? So on the far left side, right along with the y-axis, you have an anarchy state where, look, all government's bad, right? Which, what you're saying is, hey, that's what it sounds like you guys are talking about up here. You're talking about don't tax, don't do anything, don't fund the defense of the country and all those sorts of things. So go all the way. I would make the argument that actually in an anarchy, so if I start right there on this graph, the individual liberty is minimized. There's very little individual liberty in a true anarchy state because whoever has the most guns has the most power and is able to do what they want. And I would say that you could look at drug dealers or cartels or some of the industries that exist outside of the law. You can't say that force and coercion and liberty is maximized there. And then very quickly, as you start to build in some governmental structures, individual liberty starts to dramatically increase. And you get to a point on the curve where you've maximized individual liberty, right? You've got fundamental structures in place like the common defense, some level of taxation, you've got some court system or rule of law, a respect of private property, and you've maximized individual liberty. And that's the sweet spot for me. I'd say that's where capitalism is. And then quickly as you start to get to socialism and communism and a dictatorship, that all starts to fall off. And so in my mind, it's a bit of a J curve. And so I'm not up here telling you that if you absolutely don't tax, you have no laws, no courts, no structures, liberty's maximized. I don't think that's the case. I don't think the evidence backs that up. I think some of those things must exist. And the last thing I'd say is, if you think about it this way, me and you benefit the same amount from the great veterans, and hopefully we have some in the room. We both have been protected to some extent. Where it really starts to get squishy is where you benefit a whole lot because you're Paul and somebody robbed Peter to pay you. Now I can count on your support if I'm a politician, and I can't necessarily do that if I just fund the common defense. So that's sort of how I like to think about, that conflict you talked about.
I agree that there are three fundamentals of government that we need to have, and they amount to the rule of law. We do need to have the police, the courts, and the military in order to defend our individual rights. And I think that if we had a free market economic system, a laissez-faire economic system, there would be so much abundance in our world. I mean, think about what Reagan did in his 8 years in office. And he didn't really move the needle that much in terms of how much extra economic freedom he gave the country, and yet we had this massive boom during his tenure and leading over into Clinton's administration. And so if we had a truly free economic system where people weren't shackled by this regulation and that regulation and having to hire floors and floors of people just to comply with the government. Like J.P. Morgan, Yaron Brook uses this example. J.P. Morgan has something like 150 people who don't work at J.P. Morgan, they work at other institutions, come and work in their headquarter building just to make sure they're compliant. And so if we had this abundance, is it so far-fetched to say if we took taxation away that the large corporations would say, look, we want the rule of law. We want the defense of this country, and we're willing to pay 10% or whatever because the government would be so much smaller than it is today.
If you look at how government was initially set up in the country, obviously the taxation at that point was like 2 to 3% of GDP, and of course now it's, 20 23, 24, whatever it is now. So obviously it's way beyond its means. I thought the young guys were supposed to be the anarchists and us old guys were supposed to be the conservatives. But let me pose a question to you on that. The defense. What are we defending? Property rights, right? What is the cost to defend somebody's property on the border of Texas, where I've been? All right, I've been there. I've talked to the widow of a lady whose husband went out to go give water to somebody and was shot because it was a cartel. I would suggest that the reason force wins in the cartels is because that is a game that's been created by government. It's not because of an absence of government. But anyway, the cost of defending a home on the property in Texas on the border is very different than the cost of defending your home here in Colorado, right? So from a foreign power, so your property rights vary. I mean the value of defending your property rights varies. So, and here's another question I'll just pose to you. If the free markets are better at everything, why is it we give the most important jobs to government? We only give them the most important ones when we all agree that pretty much the free markets are better at everything. So I just pose those questions. In terms of defense, what are we defending? Property rights. If the government didn't own collectively land, if we all individually own the land, wouldn't that change your point of view, right? So isn't there potentially some market system for defense of property rights on a micro, to a state, to a macro level? Have you ever really thought about those questions? So, and to dovetail into that, if government sucks at stuff, why do we give them just the most important jobs, right? So, in answer to your question about defense, I think originally it was set up to be very minimalist, and we've obviously strayed from that. But I would say, I'm interested in exploring, even going further to the left. Anarchy isn't burning down buildings. It's privatization. It's free market approach to any problem of human interaction. That's basically what that is.
Yeah, so on capitalism, when I start talking about the defense of capitalism, I always get down to the function of money. So I'm glad that you brought your gun, your gold coin, and your cash. Because when you talk about capitalism or any economic system, it always comes down to the currency.
I've got Bitcoin too.
Yeah, Bitcoin, yeah. Any kind of medium of exchange. So
You're a good interviewer.
Where's my phone? I lost my phone. My Bitcoin.
So how do you bridge that gap when you come to that point in the conversation where you realize that we're not in a capitalist system because we have a fiat currency, we give money away to big banks, and then it trickles down. For all intents and purposes, the definition of capitalism does not fit the American society and hasn't for many decades. So how do you address that? How do you begin to address that with people that you're talking to?
I start on an individual basis by exploring things like Bitcoin and ways to get off of the currency game that we're on. So that's one little small step for freedom I take.
The only thing I'd say is I think you do exactly what you just said. How often do we just accept the premise? Oh, look at the capitalist structure we've had for the last 45 years, and it's getting a lot worse. And what if we actually made a really compelling point that, hey, we've lost the capitalistic structure over the last 45 years, and it's getting a lot worse? If that was the argument that people bought into, we'd all of a sudden be able to propose alternatives like actual capitalism and not crony capitalism. But so often, John McCain goes, yep, I mean, it's, well, I don't know, right? Right? We got to get to the place where we say, hey, I'm no longer going to accept your premise, and I'm going to challenge it like you just did very well. Capitalism does not exist in this country like it did 40 years ago, and things are getting a hell of a lot worse as a result. What if we went backwards?
I don't have anything to add to that.
Sorry for the John McCain supporters. That's my bad.
I think that's it.
Okay.
One more. Ben Baker,
Do we have one more time?
Bluefield County. Can I have that one? Ben Baker, Bluefield County, a LPR of 2013. Defender of capitalism, it's always a challenge to defend capitalism. A lot of people don't even want to give you the attention to do so. And you try to do a 30-second elevator speech, and let's say, are you running for office or something along those lines. You talk about, some of the issues, whether it's IRS or Benghazi or anything else, they're asleep at the wheel. They really are. And that's a big issue for us. And I think we have a really unique opportunity here to take advantage of, and that's Obamacare. If people are not asleep at the wheel, it's on the Obamacare. People are asking me what I think about it, or what's your thoughts on it. And I think we have a really unique opportunity here to really message, because we have a lot of people paying attention to this. So my question to you is, what kind of message do we give right now when we have this great opportunity to do so?
Great point, and I think it's the wrong solution for the wrong problem. And I think when you say that, you're agreeing that, hey, there's a problem with healthcare, and we all care about a solution, right? So Obamacare is the wrong solution for the wrong problem. It's not about healthcare, all right? It's about insurance, right? We've got so far away from a doctor-patient relationship and an individual responsibility for our health and for paying our doctor that we know, that stuff's long gone. So, for me, I'm a high deductible HSA kind of guy, right? So, but I think it's a great opportunity to not beat people over the head and say, see, Obama sucks. I think that's the wrong message, right? But I think it's a great opportunity to try to connect. And I'm really working at this because I'm not very good at this, because I'm one of those people who want to say, Obamacare sucks. But to connect with them and say, it's the wrong solution for the wrong problem. Let's talk about what the issues are, and let's put the people back in charge of their health care and not give it away to the government. But the biggest obstacle I see to that is that people want the government to do stuff for them, and that just baffles me.
That's the point I'm making. There's your opportunity. It's not about whether Obamacare. Here's a good example of where government has really gone astray. I mean, it has impacted you right now. And I think we need to take advantage of that bigger picture story to be told.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree with what everybody said. I think where it really gets interesting on Obamacare is that somebody somewhere is going to have to ration healthcare. The reason a free market exists is because you have a unlimited want and limited resources. And one of our problems that exist is that people are spending 80 and 90% of their healthcare costs in the last 2 or 3 years of life. And if it was any other good or service, people themselves, the consumer, would ration it. They'd say, whoa, I'm not spending $1 million. It doesn't work. I don't need the yacht, right? I don't need the food. I don't need that fancy restaurant. We all do that every day. And the governments come in prepared to ration that care. They're prepared to say, sorry, you can't have the pacemaker. And I agree that people are pretty fired up, but I do think that Americans still love liberty and freedom, and I think that's really interesting. And I think that if we could start to get to that part of this, now clearly the website sucks, clearly they made false promises, clearly they lied, clearly it's self-interested, but if we could get to a place where we ask people, hey, who gets to decide whether or not she gets a pacemaker, the federal government or our grandmother? That's a really interesting question, and I refuse to believe that, framed that way, the vast majority of Americans go, yeah, the government, for sure, sign me up for that one.
I'd like to take a page out of Mike Williams' book and start with a question, and that's, have you heard about the crisis in veterinary medicine? No? You haven't? Why do you think that is? There is no crisis. And so that's the point where you can start saying, well, what's the difference between these two? And maybe we can make the health insurance market for people look a little bit more like the veterinary medicine market, where people do buy high deductible plans for their pets. I mean, not to say that people are equivalent to pets, but just the fact that they're virtually the same market, they're the same thing, and it gives us a model, a vision to look forward to in terms of how we can fix this giant mess. And I think you are dead on, because we're at a point where we're either going to say, whoa, the only thing that we can do is have the government take the whole thing over. Or, hey, we need to go back and make some common sense reforms and start pushing towards a free market in healthcare. But we're basically at that tipping point, one way or the other.
And that's a great thing. And I would even maybe personalize a little more. Say, have you heard about the crisis in LASIK? Right? No. Why? I mean, you can get them for what? $500 an eye now, right? 10 years ago it was $10,000 an eye. Why? Oh, it's not regulated. I mean, it's not covered by insurance. Have you heard about the crisis in plastic surgery or reconstruction, or what, cosmetic surgery, right? No. Why? Because it's not covered by insurance. What's been happening to it? Costs go down. Why? All right, because it's a free market. And so why don't we have that approach to all of our medical issues?
You could also ask, have you heard about the crisis in veterans health care? And they'd say, yep, and you go, bingo.
So thank you all.
Thank you very much, guys.